Hello viewers, welcome back. This is Literary Goa, the program where we look at books and talk to authors who've done work on Goa. With me today is a special guest, Yvonne Yazdani, also known as Yvonne Vaz. Her book is called Songs of the Survivors. Actually, there are two books, Songs of the Survivors and New Songs of the Survivors. So, many of you might have heard that there was someone writing on the story of Goans in Burma, and that is Yvonne. So before Yvonne came along, most of us, all of us, were not aware that there were so many Goans in Burma living a very active life there till the 40s, till the 60s and things like that. So Yvonne, welcome to the show today, and nice to have you here. I said yours is a special book because it was our first book with which we started publishing, but that's a different story for another day. You tell me what made you get into writing on this topic of Goans in Burma. Two books, not one.
I wasn't a writer at that time, but I realized that not many people knew the stories of Burma Goans. Some of them didn't even know where was Burma. They used to ask me, what did y'all do in Burma? Did you live next to the Shwedagong Pagoda? And then I realized they didn't know anything of Burma or about the war or anything that went on. Then I realized that there were so many stories about the escape from, during World War II, the Goans escaped from India, from Burma to India, and they were living in India now, and only a few neighbors or friends knew their stories. They were not very well known anywhere.
One second, just to interrupt. When you talk about war, you're talking about World War II.
World War II.
When the Japanese invaded Burma.
That was in 1941.
Yeah, 41.
1941, the Japanese invaded Burma, and the Goans had to flee back to
virtually
India.
as refugees in that sense.
Yes, as refugees. And some of them got onto boats, some of them got onto the few last planes that were coming, but many of them had to walk across. And it was the rainy season, and the hills and the rivers were swollen. They had to cross high mountains, and it was a very difficult trek. It's called the Great Trek, and like Amitav Ghosh said, it is also called the Long Forgotten March. The people who had to walk and march through those jungles are forgotten, and no one has written about it. So I was telling my friends in Pune, I said, someone has to write about it. They said, why don't you? I said, I don't know. I didn't have the confidence enough to write. Anyway, I started collecting stories, and I got
about 2005, 2007?
2005, 6, 7. Yeah. So I started collecting stories, and I remembered what my dad had told me about how difficult it was during the war and all that. So I said, people need to know about this in Goa. And I started collecting stories, writing them down with no idea whether I was going to make a book or not. And then I met Frederick Noronha, who said, keep writing, we'll do it, we'll make a book of it. So that's how it began.
Sometimes all these boasts come out of a lack of knowledge, because at that stage even I wasn't into publishing and I had no clear idea of how we would go about it.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that your book came out as a series of stories.
Yes. So that's how it happened. And
of course Broadway
bookshop helped
to fund and get the book out.
Helped us a lot, and
that is true.
And I think we were both careful about finding our way around it, but it turned out right.
Well.
It turned out right.
So I remember releasing this book on somewhere in December
2009.
2007.
Seven.
It was at the Xavier Center because it was linked to
Yeah.
history, and Mr. Edward Falero was there, and things like that. He was the NRI commissioner, if I'm not mistaken. So how did you go about it? You used the model, if I'm not mistaken, of talking to people, each of whom told you a chapter, gave you a chapter and told you their story.
Yes.
Who's in the book, for example?
For example, Thelma Menezes, who actually encouraged me to write the book.
From Pune.
Then my uncle Peter Vaz, my aunt Isa Vaz, they all had stories to tell. And as I was writing, I realized that it was not just about the war. It was also the story of migration, how their parents and grandparents had gone from Goa to Burma and established their lives there and did so well in Burma. And that's how I saw that there were different layers to the story.
Before we get into that, I want to go back one step and talk about this big Vaz clan from Saligaon. Your uncles, your dad, your uncles, a big family of 6-7 brothers, something like that.
Yeah.
And you can tell us more. And all of whom ended up in Burma. So tell us about the Vaz family and which parts of Burma they went to. A lot of them were engineers, very skilled people. I remember, the same time we came back from Brazil, they came back from Burma. It was about the 60s and things like that. So tell us about their family.
It was my great-grandfather, Santan Salvador Vaz, who went first to Burma, but we don't know much about him.
Which year?
In the 18, it must have been about 1850 or so, because my grandfather was about 14 years old when he went. And the story that I know is about my grandfather, because we knew him, we met him every year. And he went alone. He came back, married my grandmother and took her there. And they had 7 sons and 1 daughter. My dad was the eldest. So that was the family he established there.
In Burma?
In Burma. In Taungji, in the Shan states of Burma.
That's in the south?
That's in the
north.
eastern
I'm getting it
part
all
of
wrong.
Burma. It's on the near the Thailand border. And
this is maybe 1910s where your dad was born?
My dad was born in 1913.
13.
Yeah. So then the family was established there, and somehow the Goans in Burma were doing very well. I think it's because they could speak English. They got along well with the British, who were their masters, and they established themselves in different fields, which I think they never would have done in Goa.
Of course.
Yeah,
of
like
course.
my grandfather, he became the draftsman in the PWD. And
a lot of your
rose.
uncles were engineers also.
And after that, my uncles and all, they went to GTI and to
What
the
is GTI?
Government Technical Institute. And my father and also my 4 other uncles all joined the PWD and became...
There and here in Goa also, some of them.
Yeah. And they became what is known as STOs. STOs are sub-divisional officers. They became officers,
Senior
which
post,
is quite a
in
high.
those times. But Yvonne, just to go back one step, Burma was almost a part of India in those days, administratively. At least you could travel there without visas, passports, nothing. Right?
I don't think so. I think it was earlier that was the case.
Under the British?
Yeah, but I remember my grandfather having to change his visa from Portuguese visa passport to Indian passport. I remember that time. And then my father and all, they had to apply for visas to come to India.
Come to India? Okay. Okay, so it was not like going to Bombay, Bangalore, Karachi or Calcutta or something like that. It was a different...
It was a different country.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I don't really know the political connections between, but...
To go from the small to the large, how big was the Goan community there, more or less?
Where we were living, I think it was just the Vaz family. But in Rangoon, there were a lot of Goans
200,
in
300,
different fields of
200s?
week. But most of them were there before the war. During the war, they left. And after the war, very few families were left.
Okay.
I think maybe about 50 families in Rangoon after the war.
I see.
Before that, there must have been at least 300 or 400 families.
Yeah.
And maybe more even.
You described bakeries, Goan bakeries, you described other businesses, you described people.
Music. That's why I called I named it Songs of the Survivors, because so many of them were musicians, and they established themselves as famous musicians. They opened music schools, music shops.
Music shops.
Yeah.
That's typical of Goans, no? All
many
over,
of
all
them.
over the place.
Yeah.
Even in Singapore, Malaya, they had music shops and.
Yeah. And there was a lot of, maybe there were other careers that they went into too, but many of them rose to a high position, like A.J. de Cruz. He became one of the top in the British administrative system.
I see.
And then there were others like Thelma Menezes' family and all. They were all teachers, and
they did well for themselves, but with
they
a
were
certain
educated.
price.
They educated the second generation.
Yeah,
there.
very well.
Although they went, there was one who told me that he had no education at all. He used to work with his aunt in the fields in Goa.
I see.
And he went there and he became a station master.
Wow.
Yeah. And he became quite rich too, because he had a big farm. And
so in a way, this is a story of Goan migration, Yvonne, isn't it? That Goans leave their home, they go elsewhere, they do well. But doing well also comes with a price. Often it's like you get uprooted from your own home and you have to fight to get back your houses. And in your case, there was this trauma of becoming refugees almost twice. In the 40s when the Japanese invaded, and then the Vazes went back to Burma, many of them.
They didn't go back, they were there all the time. They couldn't escape. My family, they missed the last flight to India, and because the airport was bombed, and they couldn't walk across because of many sick people and all that. So they lived in Burma during the Japanese occupation.
Okay.
Japanese occupation.
But some of your uncles and all came back or no?
They came back in 1960.
Okay. So your family stayed on through the war, but you all got affected twice during the 42 bombing and Japanese invasion, and in 60s during this Nevin and the Burmese road to socialism and all that, where the country closed its doors. In a very dramatic sense, and you mentioned in your book also that even if you were educated there, you had to pay to leave the country because they considered that they are educated. Tell us about what life was, how it changed after independence. While independence meant good for many people, it also unsettled others. So tell us about that.
After independence, there was a very peaceful era, and there was plenty. What I remember about Burma is the abundance. There was plenty of food, there was plenty of good things in life, material things, as well as there was an abundance of love and kindness. That's what I remember.
Someone called it a land of milk and honey. I think that was your Auntie Isa, your neighbor.
It was. We never lacked anything, and we were very happy there. And the people were very nice.
Kind, polite.
Got on well. The Buddhist ambience. There was wealth, but even if they didn't have wealth, there was
got on well. Got on well with the Goan communities.
People.
Goans were not seen as exploiters, and
No.
Yeah.
And the Buddhist people are very tolerant, accepting of everyone, have that compassion.
I see.
So there were no conflicts with people there, and that created all the happiness and the joy in our lives.
But it changed in the 60s.
In the 60s, the people didn't change. It was the government that changed, and there was a lot of economic hardships because everything was nationalized and taken over. A lot of foreigners left the country because there were very harsh rules regarding foreigners.
And it's
staying in
very
Burma.
sad that Burma is still going through tough times, despite of all the hopes and Aung San Suu Kyi, and
it's getting even worse, I think. At least there was no violence during our time while we were there. It was just that the economy was really very bad, and there was not enough. I mean, we couldn't get enough of what we wanted materially, and.
Military rule and things like that came in later.
Yeah, a lot of rules, a lot of spying on people and all that.
You came in the 80s. No freedom. You ultimately came in the 80s.
Yeah,
that was late.
We were the last family to come.
Really?
And all my other uncles and aunts came in 1960s, but my dad came in 1980 and
Yeah.
we came in 1982.
Okay,
So-
we'll leave the politics aside for the moment, but since we are talking about books, let's get back to that. Your first book touches on Goans in Burma, and then I feel almost proud to say that others in the rest of the country realized that there was no book on Indians in Burma, so you went about doing this book.
I got a few more.
Yeah. So tell us about this book and what was your I mean, like, it's a matter of pride that someone from Goa is reminding the rest of the country that you had a community there also. I think prominent Indians like Prakash Karat's family, one of the CPM leaders, no? Who was that?
From Orissa.
One of the CPM leader families were in Burma. Jerry Pinto's family was in Burma.
Yeah, Jerry Pinto's family was there.
The writer Jerry
Yeah.
Pinto. So tell us what you found in your second book while doing your second book.
Actually, the second book was more about putting all the stories together and narrating it as one, not separate stories. But then I got a few friends from Tamil Nadu who said they read my book and they too had a story to tell.
Wow.
So I said, if you can give me more stories, I'll add them. We put other voices because we said these are Goan voices first and then
Make it wider.
we made it wider. We put other voices. So I got also Helen the dancer, the actress.
Helen.
Yeah. Jerry Pinto.
Yeah,
wrote about her.
Jerry Pinto discovered and wrote about her Burmese roots,
Yes.
and she features in this book also, Helen.
Yes. Yeah.
So Helen is
Whatever
part
Jerry-
Burmese. Helen is part Burmese, Anglo-Burmese.
Anglo-Burmese, I think. I'm not sure. But she was very young when they
she
walked
came.
across. Yeah.
And she became a big name in Bollywood films,
Yeah,
probably.
but she doesn't like to talk about it much, maybe. But Jerry somehow got something,
see.
and that's
Interesting.
how we got it. And then there was another lady who had already written a book, and her daughter gave me the story,
I see.
Shakuntala's story. If you read in the book Shakuntala's story,
I see.
it's very interesting because it's different from the Goan
Experience,
stories.
yeah. But what is fascinating is that you are sitting in this tiny part of India called Goa, and you are discovering something for the rest of the country.
I think it was meant to be. I just feel that these books were meant to be written,
yeah.
and I happened to be the one to write it, and because no one else was doing it.
Anyway, so now that you've written 2 books, I think the virus and the bug has caught you completely. You're writing a third, which is your autobiography. Tell us about that.
Actually, my daughter told me, write something about Burma and Goa and about your lives there for my grandchildren. So I said, okay. She said, there's nobody to tell them those stories. You write about it.
They're still small, but they're growing up.
They're still small, and 12, 10.
12.
And so I began to write for them, actually.
Yeah.
And as I was writing, I felt I was remembering things that I thought I had forgotten, and it was going into a deeper part of me, and the writing was coming out in a different way than I had planned it.
Yeah.
So I showed it to Jerry Pinto. He said it would make a good book. Just keep writing till you reach so many words.
Yeah.
Otherwise I would have stopped,
Yeah.
with a little bit. So I kept writing, and then I kept editing. I gave it to someone to read. They said it's good, can make a book of it. So
when you're leading life, it all looks like small disparate things coming together, but when you look back at it, you realize there's a pattern, you realize there's an interesting story. Almost everyone has a story. I'm not saying everyone, but those who remember it, those who think deeply about it, those who can piece it together like you have done. So here is you coming back from Burma to Goa in the 80s, struggling, leading quite a tough life, taking up a job, teaching English at the high secondary level and things like that. There's an interesting love story woven into. I thought that was very dramatic. I was reading it at 3-4 o'clock in the morning and I couldn't put it down. You want to say a word on that?
that was in Burma.
Yeah.
In Kalor. Kalor is a very romantic place. So
This is outside Rangoon?
No, it's in the Shan state.
In the Shan state.
Yeah, it's in the Shan state. And he was my neighbor, became my husband later. And we went for a walk and realized that it began there, and realized that we were in love with each other. I didn't know that before, but it gradually grew, and for 7 years we were together as girlfriend and boyfriend, and then we got married, although the parents did not agree.
On both sides.
In the beginning there was parental opposition, but later on everyone was okay with it, and we get along very well together. We are a close family.
So you've cut off the most interesting parts, but I'm not going to be a plot spoiler and tell it to the reader. I'll make them read your book, so that, because there's a lot of drama that comes into this story also. But I thought it was fascinating. And then
why don't people read my book then?
Yes, correct. And at the same time, then adjusting in Goa is not easy, right? In the 80s.
Adjusting, it was very hard, because my husband went off to try and earn something in the Gulf, didn't get a job for a long time, and then we couldn't bring anything from Burma. We came as refugees.
You were not allowed to take out anything?
No, we were allowed $11 each. My husband $11 and me $11.
And someone threatening you at the airport.
At the airport, trying to get money. That was a funny thing, and we couldn't bring much. And one suitcase of clothes, nothing for the children, no extra baggage for the children at all. So my 2 girls were young at that time. So we came with hardly nothing and hardly anything. And I'm so grateful that I have many cousins, aunts and uncles, and especially my father and my brothers who were here. They really helped us.
You've told your story so nicely, and in the book it reads even better, because there's scope for much more details. Here we are forced to, the tyranny of time. One last question. Tell us what it is like to write your memoirs, and why people should do it, why you feel it's important, assuming you do.
Like I told you, it brought out the deeper layers in me. And some things I thought I had forgotten, but they were there within me, and they came out later, and I was able to look at it in new light, understand what happened earlier. And it was interesting to me. My own life became interesting to me. Even the difficulties and the hardships and all, I saw how I got through them.
That's a nice way of putting it.
And I sort of wanted to write about it. It was like a catharsis. I felt good after writing it. And I think
you're leaving this for your grandchildren also.
I wrote it actually for my grandchildren, but now we're making it in a book, so I hope many people will read it and
pick up some lessons from that. You're always very optimistic.
I learned a lot of lessons from my life, so I've shared that in my book too. Actually, there is a lot I've learned about relationships with people and how to get through certain situations and all that. So that's what I wrote about. Some people may think it's too philosophical, but I couldn't help that.
I think it's well written. It's very simply put. You're not standing there and preaching and things like that. So it flows really well. But are you also saying that anyone who thinks deeply can write about their own life and share some lessons from it?
I think so. I was going to advise people to try and write their stories. Write it from the heart. Whatever you feel comes, you just write it.
Don't censor yourself.
And then later, the first draft should be from the heart. And after that, you edit it, or you ask someone to read it, or whatever. And especially if you want to make it into a book, then you need help in editing or whatever. But I think the first draft has to come from the heart, and it has to just flow. And because there's so much in our lives, like I told you, there's so much in our lives that sometimes is even hidden from us.
That's true.
And it reveals itself as you are doing the writing. And I think everyone has an interesting story to tell. Each one's life is unique. The people you meet, the encounters, and
There's something special about everything. That's so true.
It
That's
is.
so true.
It is.
Even I'm so grateful for these 2 books because I enjoyed the knowledge that you put across. I'm waiting for the third. And I'm not going to ask you what's coming after that, but I hope that there will be many more, and keep writing. Keep it up. All the best. Thank you so
I
much.
like writing short articles too. I think I'll go more into that.
You were threatening to write for children, but then your grandchildren are young enough to do that.
No, I don't think I will write about for children.
You're not going to compete with our friend Anita Pinto.
Anita's too good.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and letting me talk about my books.
A pleasure.
And
Real
my
pleasure.
life.
Real pleasure.
My life and my books are tied up, so I had to talk about both of them.
Thank you. Thank you.